The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Royal Lodge as Princess Beatrice stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to her father's beloved rose bushes. The familiar sight that once brought her comfort now felt like a reminder of everything that was slipping away from her family. At 35, Beatrice had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded major changes in royal life, and, lately, those signs were everywhere. Her phone buzzed on the mahogany dresser, another message from her private secretary asking about her schedule for the upcoming royal engagements. The irony wasn't lost on her that while her calendar remained frustratingly empty, other family members seemed busier than ever. She set the phone aside without responding, unable to shake the feeling that her role within the royal family was becoming increasingly undefined. The smell of breakfast wafted up from the kitchen below, where her stepmother Sarah was likely preparing her famous weekend spread. Despite everything the family had endured over the years, Sarah's unwavering optimism and determination to maintain normal family traditions had become an anchor for them all. Beatrice knew that downstairs, life would carry on with the same warmth and chaos that had characterized her childhood, even as the world outside their home grew more complicated by the day. Making her way down the grand staircase, Beatrice could hear her father's booming laugh echoing from the breakfast room. Prince Andrew's spirits had been remarkably resilient lately, though she suspected it was partly an act for the benefit of his daughters. The past few years had taken their toll on him, and while the family had weathered the worst storms together, the aftermath continued to shape their daily reality in ways both subtle and profound. "Morning, darling," Sarah called out cheerfully as Beatrice entered the sun-filled breakfast room. "Your father's been regaling us with stories from his Navy days again. I swear he remembers new details every time he tells them." Prince Andrew looked up from his newspaper with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just try to remind myself of simpler times," he said, folding the paper carefully. "Though I suppose every era has its complications when you look back honestly." Beatrice settled into her usual chair, accepting a cup of coffee from the hovering staff member. The normalcy of the scene felt almost surreal given the undercurrents of tension that had been building within the royal family for months. She had always prided herself on being perceptive about family dynamics, but lately, she felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Any interesting plans for the week?" Sarah asked, her tone deliberately light. It was a question she'd been asking more frequently lately, and Beatrice suspected her stepmother was picking up on the same signals she was noticing. "Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss with both of you," Beatrice said, setting down her cup. "I've been thinking about my role within the family, and I can't help but notice that things seem to be shifting." Prince Andrew's expression grew more serious. "What kind of shifting are you referring to?" Beatrice chose her words carefully. "It feels like there's a reorganization happening, but nobody's talking about it directly. My engagement calendar has been unusually light, and when I reach out about participating in certain events, I'm told they're either postponed or that other arrangements have been made." The room fell quiet except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Beatrice's hand, a gesture of support that spoke volumes about her stepmother's intuitive understanding of the situation. "You know how these things work," Prince Andrew said finally. "The institution has its own rhythm, its own way of making decisions. Sometimes we're not privy to all the considerations that go into scheduling and assignments." But Beatrice could hear the uncertainty in his voice. As someone who had once been much closer to the center of royal operations, her father understood better than most how these subtle exclusions typically preceded more significant changes. The fact that he couldn't offer her more concrete reassurance was telling in itself. "I just want to make sure I'm not misreading the situation," Beatrice continued. "If there are changes being made, I'd rather know about them directly than try to piece things together from canceled appointments and vague explanations." Sarah stood up and moved to the window, her usual buoyancy replaced by a more contemplative mood. "You know, when I was going through my own difficulties with the family years ago, I spent so much time wondering what people were thinking, what decisions were being made behind closed doors. It's an exhausting way to live. But You found your way through it, Beatrice pointed out. You rebuilt your relationship with the family, found your place again. I did, but it took time and a lot of honest conversations, Sarah replied, turning back to face them. And sometimes it meant accepting that my role would be different than what I had originally envisioned. Prince Andrew cleared his throat. Perhaps it's time for me to have some conversations of my own. I may not be in the position I once was, but I still have connections, people who can give me a clearer picture of what's happening. Beatrice appreciated the offer, but she also recognized the delicate position her father was in. His own relationship with the rest of the royal family remained complicated, and she didn't want to put him in an awkward situation by asking him to advocate for her. I think I need to handle this myself, she said. But I wanted to talk it through with both of you first to make sure I'm not overthinking things or missing something obvious. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Beatrice's sister Eugenie, who burst into the room with her characteristic energy, baby Christopher in her arms. The sight of her nephew immediately lifted Beatrice's spirits, reminding her of what truly mattered in her life. "Sorry I'm late," Eugenie said, settling the baby in his carrier before accepting a cup of coffee from Sarah. Traffic was horrible coming from London, and this little one decided he needed an extra feeding stop. "How's Jack managing with the new work schedule?" Sarah asked, always interested in the details of her daughter's lives. "He's adapting well," Eugenie replied, "though I think he's still getting used to the idea that royal schedules don't always align with normal business hours." Beatrice watched her sister's animated discussion of domestic life with a mixture of affection and slight envy. Eugenie had always seemed more comfortable navigating the balance between royal duty and personal fulfillment, perhaps because she had never expected to be at the center of royal operations. "Actually," Eugenie said, turning to Beatrice, "I've been meaning to ask you about something. I had lunch with Zara last week, and she mentioned some interesting developments in the family's approach to public engagements." Beatrice's attention sharpened. "What kind of developments?" She was being a bit cryptic about it, but she seemed to suggest that there were new guidelines being developed about who participates in what kinds of events, Eugenie explained. "I got the impression it was part of a broader modernization effort." Prince Andrew and Sarah exchanged glances across the table. This was the first any of them had heard about formal guidelines being developed, and the fact that Zara Tindall was discussing it suggested the changes might be more extensive than they had realized. "Did she say anything specific about how these guidelines would be implemented?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Not really, but she did mention that the focus was going to be on streamlining operations and ensuring that public resources were being used as effectively as possible," Eugenie replied. She seemed genuinely excited about it, actually like she thought it would make things clearer for everyone. Beatrice nodded thoughtfully. Zara's perspective would naturally be different from her own, given that Zara had never been a working member of the royal family in the traditional sense. What might seem like helpful clarification to Zara could represent a significant restriction for someone like Beatrice, who had always expected to have a more formal role in royal duties. "I think," Beatrice said slowly, "that I need to have some conversations of my own with family members who might have a better understanding of these changes." "Just be careful about how you approach it," Prince Andrew advised. "Sometimes asking direct questions can create the impression that you're challenging decisions that have already been made." It was sound advice, born from his own experience, navigating the complexities of royal politics. Beatrice appreciated the guidance, even as she recognized that her situation required her to take some initiative rather than simply waiting for clarity to emerge naturally. The rest of the morning passed pleasantly enough, with the family focusing on lighter topics and enjoying Christopher's delightful baby antics. But beneath the surface warmth, Beatrice could feel the weight of unresolved questions pressing on her consciousness. She had always prided herself on being someone who faced challenges directly, and this situation was no exception. As the family began to disperse for their various afternoon activities, Beatrice found herself alone with her thoughts in the garden. The roses her father cherished so much were beginning their autumn decline, their petals scattered across the pathway like confetti from a celebration that had already ended. It seemed like an apt metaphor for her current situation. Her phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. It was her private secretary, calling with what should have been good news about a potential engagement with a children's literacy charity. But as the conversation progressed, Beatrice detected the same hesitancy she had been noticing in other communications recently. "I'll need to confirm a few details before we can give you a definitive answer," her secretary explained. "There seem to be some new protocols that need to be followed for this type of engagement." After ending the call, Beatrice sat on the garden bench, where she had spent countless hours as a child, trying to process the growing evidence that her role within the royal family was indeed changing in ways that no one seemed willing to discuss openly. The uncertainty was perhaps more difficult to handle than a direct conversation about limitations would have been. She thought about Zara's apparent enthusiasm for the new guidelines Eugenie had mentioned. Perhaps from the outside, the changes did seem like logical modernization efforts. But for someone who had grown up expecting to contribute to the family's public service mission, the implications felt much more personal and potentially limiting. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade when Beatrice finally made her decision. She would reach out to family members who might be able to provide clearer information about what was happening, but she would do so in a way that emphasized her desire to be helpful rather than challenging. It was a delicate balance, but one that her years of experience within the royal family had prepared her to manage. As she walked back toward the house, Beatrice caught sight of her father in his study, surrounded by the memorabilia and photographs that chronicled his years of service to the crown. Despite everything he had endured, his pride in his royal heritage remained undiminished. She hoped that whatever changes were coming, they would allow her to honor that same tradition of service, even if the specific form of that service might be different than what she had originally envisioned. The evening ahead promised to be quiet, a family dinner where the conversation would likely focus on safe topics rather than the undercurrents of uncertainty that seemed to be affecting them all. But Beatrice knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to seek the clarity she needed, and she was determined to approach those opportunities with the grace and dignity that her position required, regardless of what she might discover about her future role within the royal family. The following Monday morning found Princess Beatrice in her London apartment, staring at her phone as she contemplated the conversation she was about to initiate. After spending the weekend processing her growing concerns about her role within the royal family, she had decided that the most appropriate first step would be to reach out to her cousin Peter Phillips, who had always maintained cordial relationships across all branches of the family, while staying carefully neutral in any disputes. Peter's voice was warm when he answered, though Beatrice detected a slight note of surprise. They had always gotten along well, but their adult lives had taken them in different directions, making regular communication less frequent than it had been during their childhood. "Beatrice, lovely to hear from you," Peter said. "How are things with you and the family?" "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Beatrice replied, settling into her favorite armchair. "I was hoping we could meet for coffee sometime soon. I have some questions about recent developments in family operations, and I thought you might have some insights." There was a brief pause before Peter responded. "Of course, I'd be happy to catch up, though I should mention that I'm probably not the best source for information about official family business these days." The careful phrasing of his response confirmed Beatrice's suspicion that changes were indeed taking place, and that even family members who had traditionally been well-informed were being kept at arm's length from certain decisions. Still, she felt that any perspective would be valuable at this point. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in Notting Hill that following Wednesday, a location chosen for its relative privacy and Peter's convenience. As Beatrice ended the call, she felt both relief at having taken action and apprehension about what she might learn from their conversation. The intervening days passed slowly, with Beatrice finding herself analyzing every interaction with royal staff and family members for potential clues about the changes that seemed to be taking place. Her private secretary continued to report delays and complications with engagement requests that should have been straightforward, and Beatrice began to notice a pattern in the types of events that were being deemed problematic. Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected phone call from her cousin Zara Tindall, whose voice carried an enthusiasm that immediately put Beatrice on alert. In her experience, when family members called with particular excitement about royal matters, it usually meant significant changes were in motion. "Beatrice, I'm so glad I caught you," Zara said. "I want to talk to you about some exciting developments that I think could really benefit everyone in the family." "What kind of developments?" Beatrice asked, though she suspected she already knew the direction this conversation would take. "Well, there's been a lot of discussion about modernizing how the family approaches public duties," Zara explained. "The idea is to create clearer guidelines that will help everyone understand their role and make the whole operation more efficient." Beatrice chose her words carefully. "That sounds like it could be helpful. Have these guidelines been finalized yet?" "They're still being developed, but the preliminary framework is really promising," Zara continued. "The focus is on ensuring that royal resources are used in the most effective way possible, and that public engagements are aligned with the family's core mission." The phrase, "royal resources," caught Beatrice's attention. It suggested that the guidelines might include financial considerations, possibly relating to who received funding for their royal activities. This would represent a significant shift from traditional practices and could explain some of the hesitancy she had been encountering with her engagement requests. "Have you been involved in developing these guidelines?" Beatrice asked. "I've been consulted on some aspects," Zara replied, "mainly because my situation has always been a bit different from the traditional royal roles, so I think they wanted input on how to handle various family members who contribute in different ways." Beatrice appreciated Zara's diplomatic phrasing, but she could read between the lines. As someone who had pursued an independent career while maintaining family connections, Zara's perspective would naturally favor guidelines that legitimized non-traditional approaches to royal duty. For someone like Beatrice, who had expected to follow a more conventional path, such guidelines might feel more restrictive than liberating. "I'd be interested in learning more about the specific areas these guidelines will cover," Beatrice said. "Actually, that's part of why I called," Zara replied. "I think there might be some really positive opportunities for you in this new framework, but it would probably be helpful for you to have some direct conversations with the people who are leading the development process." The suggestion was clearly well-intentioned, but it also confirmed that Beatrice's concerns about being excluded from important discussions were justified. If Zara felt the need to facilitate conversations, it meant that those conversations weren't happening naturally through normal family channels. After ending the call with Zara, Beatrice spent the rest of the afternoon researching recent royal announcements and media coverage, looking for any public hints about the changes that were apparently being discussed privately. She found several articles speculating about royal modernization efforts, but nothing that provided concrete details about how such efforts might affect individual family members. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Beatrice's mood as she prepared for her meeting with Peter Phillips. She chose her outfit carefully, wanting to appear put together and confident rather than anxious or defensive. The last thing she wanted was to give the impression that she was struggling to adapt to changing circumstances. The cafe in Notting Hill was appropriately quiet when she arrived, with only a few other patrons scattered among the small tables. Peter was already seated in a corner booth, looking characteristically relaxed despite the early hour. He stood to greet her with a warm hug, and, for a moment, Beatrice felt like they were simply cousins catching up rather than royal family members navigating institutional politics. "You look well," Peter said as they settled into their seats. "Though I have to admit, your call made me curious about what's been on your mind lately." Beatrice accepted a menu from the hovering waiter before responding. "I've been noticing some changes in how family business is being handled, and I'm trying to understand what they mean for my own role." Peter nodded thoughtfully. "I've been picking up on some shifts as well, though I'm probably not in the best position to offer definitive insights. My relationship with the operational side of things has always been somewhat peripheral, but you hear things and you have good instincts about family dynamics," Beatrice pointed out. "I'm not looking for official information, just your sense of what might be happening." After they had placed their orders, Peter leaned back in his chair and considered her question carefully. "From what I can gather, there seems to be a comprehensive review taking place of how royal duties are assigned and supported. It's being framed as a modernization effort, but I suspect there are also financial considerations driving some of the decisions. This aligned with Beatrice's own observations and confirmed her suspicion that budget concerns were playing a larger role than was being publicly acknowledged. Do you know who's leading this review? I believe it's being handled primarily by the private secretary's offices, with input from senior family members, Peter replied. But the process seems to be quite confidential, which suggests they want to finalize everything before there's any broad discussion about the changes. The arrival of their coffee provided a natural pause in the conversation, giving Beatrice time to process this information. The fact that major decisions about royal roles were being made without input from the affected family members was concerning, though not entirely surprising given the institution's traditional approach to change management. Has anyone spoken to you directly about how these changes might affect your own activities? Peter asked. Not directly, no, but I've been experiencing delays and complications with engagement requests that used to be routine, Beatrice explained. And when I ask for explanations, I get vague responses about new protocols or the need for additional approvals. Peter's expression grew more serious. That's frustrating, especially when you're trying to plan ahead and fulfill your commitments. Have you considered reaching out directly to someone who might be able to give you clearer information? I've been thinking about it, but I'm not sure who the right person would be, Beatrice admitted. And I don't want to create the impression that I'm challenging decisions that have already been made. I understand the delicate balance involved, Peter said. But at some point, you have a right to understand how these changes will affect your ability to fulfill your royal duties. After all, you've been committed to public service for years. The validation in Peter's response was comforting, confirming that her concerns were reasonable rather than paranoid. As someone who had observed the royal family from both inside and outside perspectives, his opinion carried weight with Beatrice. Their conversation continued over the course of the next hour, covering various aspects of recent family dynamics and the challenges of maintaining traditional roles in an evolving institution. Peter shared some insights he had gained from his own experience of defining a non-traditional royal role, while Beatrice described her growing frustration with the lack of clear communication about her future responsibilities. As they prepared to leave, Peter offered a piece of advice that stayed with Beatrice for the rest of the day. Sometimes the best approach is to focus on what you want to contribute rather than what you think you're entitled to. If you can articulate a clear vision for your role that aligns with the family's evolving priorities, it might be easier to find a place within whatever new framework they're developing. Walking back to her car through the busy London streets, Beatrice reflected on Peter's suggestion. It represented a shift in perspective from defending her existing role to proactively defining a new one, which might indeed be more effective given the changing circumstances she was facing. The rest of the week brought additional evidence that significant changes were indeed in motion. Beatrice's private secretary reported that several upcoming engagements have been postponed indefinitely, and, when pressed for explanations, could only say that new approval processes were being implemented. Meanwhile, Beatrice noticed that other family members seemed to be maintaining their normal schedules, suggesting that the changes were not affecting everyone equally. Friday brought an unexpected invitation to lunch from her aunt, Princess, and who rarely initiated social meetings without a specific purpose. The invitation was framed casually, but Beatrice suspected it might be related to the ongoing changes in royal operations. Princess Anne's position within the family hierarchy meant she would likely have insights into any major policy developments. As Beatrice confirmed her attendance at the lunch, she felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about what she might learn. Princess Anne was known for her direct communication style, which meant the conversation would likely be more straightforward than the diplomatic exchanges she had been having with other family members. The weekend passed quietly at Royal Lodge, where Beatrice tried to focus on family time rather than her professional concerns. But even during relaxed moments with her father and stepmother, she found her mind returning to the questions that remained unanswered about her future role within the royal family. Sunday evening brought a phone call from Eugenie, who had exciting news about a new charitable initiative she was developing. As Eugenie described her plans with characteristic enthusiasm, Beatrice couldn't help but notice that her sister seemed to be proceeding without any of the obstacles that had been affecting her own activities. Have you encountered any new restrictions or approval processes for your charitable work? Beatrice asked when Eugenie paused for breath. Not really, Eugenie replied, sounding slightly puzzled by the question. Why? Are you having problems with something? Beatrice decided not to elaborate, not wanting to burden her sister with concerns that might be premature. But the conversation reinforced her growing sense that the changes being implemented were specifically targeting certain types of royal activities or certain family members. As she prepared for bed that Sunday night, Beatrice felt both apprehensive and determined about the week ahead. The lunch with Princess and would hopefully provide some clarity about the situation, while Zara's suggestion about having direct conversations with the people leading the modernization effort was becoming increasingly appealing despite her initial reluctance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Beatrice was committed to approaching them with the dignity and grace that her position required, while also advocating appropriately for her ability to continue contributing to the royal family's mission of public service. Princess Anne's Georgian townhouse in London always felt like stepping into a perfectly preserved piece of British history, where every piece of furniture and artwork told a story of decades spent in royal service. As Beatrice was shown into the elegant dining room that Tuesday afternoon, she couldn't help but feel that the setting itself was sending a message about tradition, duty, and the weight of institutional memory. Her aunt appeared promptly at 1 o'clock, dressed in her characteristic understated style that somehow managed to convey both authority and approachability. Princess Anne had always been someone who commanded respect through competence rather than ceremony, and her greeting to Beatrice was warm but purposeful. Thank you for making time on such short notice, Princess Anne said as they settled at the mahogany table. I thought it was important for us to have a conversation about recent developments that may affect the family's approach to public duties. The directness of the statement confirmed Beatrice's suspicion that this lunch was indeed related to the changes she had been observing. She appreciated her aunt's straightforward approach, even as she felt her anxiety level increase in anticipation of what she might learn. I've been noticing some changes in how engagement requests are being handled, Beatrice replied carefully. I was hoping to gain a better understanding of what those changes might mean going forward. Princess Anne nodded as their first course arrived, a simple but elegant soup that reflected her preference for substance over show. There has indeed been a comprehensive review of how the family allocates resources and assigns responsibilities for public duties. The process has been ongoing for several months, though the details haven't been widely discussed. Beatrice waited for her aunt to continue, knowing that Princess Anne would provide information in her own methodical way. The silence stretched comfortably between them, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware against china. The review has identified several areas where improvements could be made, Princess Anne continued. Primarily, there's been concern about ensuring that public resources are used as effectively as possible and that the family's public activities are clearly aligned with strategic priorities. The phrase, public resources, echoed what Zara had mentioned during their conversation, confirming that financial considerations were indeed a significant factor in the changes being implemented. Beatrice understood the practical necessity of such considerations, even as she felt concerned about how they might affect her own role. Are these changes being applied uniformly across all family members? Beatrice asked. Princess Anne paused thoughtfully before responding. The implementation is being tailored to reflect different circumstances and levels of involvement in royal duties. The goal is to create a framework that acknowledges the various ways family members contribute while ensuring clarity about expectations and support. It was a diplomatically phrased answer that nevertheless suggested that different family members would be affected differently by the new guidelines. Beatrice appreciated her aunt's careful approach to explaining the situation, even as she wished for more specific information about her own circumstances. I've been experiencing some delays and complications with engagement requests, Beatrice said. Would those be related to these new guidelines? Quite possibly, Princess replied. New approval processes have been implemented to ensure that all public activities align with the established framework. It's an adjustment period for everyone involved, including the staff members who handle scheduling and logistics. The main course arrived, providing another natural pause in their conversation. Beatrice used the time to consider how to phrase her most pressing questions without appearing to challenge decisions that had apparently already been made. I'm wondering if there's anything I should be doing differently in terms of proposing or planning engagements, Beatrice said finally. Princess set down her fork and looked directly at her niece. That's actually one of the things I wanted to discuss with you. The new framework places greater emphasis on demonstrating clear public benefit and strategic alignment for royal activities. Family members are being encouraged to develop more focused portfolios that play to their particular strengths and interests. This was the most specific guidance Beatrice had received since her concerns began, and she felt both grateful for the information and apprehensive about its implications. The emphasis on demonstrating clear public benefit suggested that activities that might have been automatically approved in the past would now require more substantial justification. Are there particular areas or types of activities that are being prioritized? Beatrice asked. The focus is on initiatives that can demonstrate measurable impact and align with government priorities or significant social needs, Princess explained. There's also preference for activities that leverage existing relationships and expertise rather than creating entirely new programs. Beatrice nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand how the new framework might affect her current portfolio of interests and commitments. Some of her activities would likely fit well within these guidelines, while others might require significant modification or might not be sustainable under the new approach. I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to me, Beatrice said. It helps to understand the reasoning behind the changes, even if they represent a significant adjustment. Princess Anne's expression softened slightly. Change is never easy, particularly when it affects work that you care about deeply. But institutions that don't evolve tend to become irrelevant, and none of us want that for the royal family. The wisdom in her aunt's observation was undeniable, though Beatrice couldn't help but feel that the evolution was happening around her rather than with her input. Still, she recognized that expressing such concerns would be both unproductive and potentially damaging to her position. Their conversation continued over coffee, with Princess sharing insights from her own decades of experience adapting to changing royal expectations. Her perspective was valuable, having successfully navigated numerous institutional shifts while maintaining a meaningful role in public service. The key, Princess said as their lunch drew to a close, is to focus on what you can control rather than lamenting what you cannot. If you can identify areas where your contributions are both valued and aligned with the new priorities, you'll be in a much stronger position going forward. As Beatrice prepared to leave, her aunt offered one final piece of advice that would stay with her for weeks to come. Don't wait for others to define your role for you. If you have ideas about how you'd like to contribute within the new framework, now is the time to articulate them clearly and persuasively. The drive back to her apartment gave Beatrice time to process everything she had learned during lunch. While she still didn't have complete clarity about how the changes would specifically affect her, she now understood the general direction the family was moving and could begin planning accordingly. That evening brought a phone call from Zara Tindall, who seemed eager to follow up on their previous conversation about the modernization efforts. Zara's enthusiasm was infectious, though Beatrice found herself listening with new perspective after a discussion with Princess Anne. I've been thinking more about our conversation, Zara said, and I really do think there could be some excellent opportunities for you in the new structure. Your background in business and your commitment to education initiatives could be a perfect fit for what they're looking for. Beatrice appreciated the encouragement, though she was beginning to recognize that Zara's optimism might be partly based on her own very different relationship with royal duties. As someone who had always maintained independence from formal royal funding, Zara might not fully understand the implications of the changes for family members who had been following more traditional paths. I'm definitely interested in exploring how I might contribute most effectively, Beatrice replied. Do you think there would be value in me reaching out directly to discuss specific ideas? Absolutely, Zara said without hesitation. I think they'd welcome input from family members who are serious about adapting to the new approach. And honestly, your perspective could be really valuable for them as they finalize the guidelines. After ending the call with Zara, Beatrice spent the rest of the evening drafting notes about potential areas where she could focus her efforts within the new framework. The process was both challenging and energizing, forcing her to think strategically about her interests and capabilities in ways she hadn't done before. The following morning brought unexpected developments when her private secretary called with news that several postponed engagements were being reconsidered under new criteria. While this was encouraging, the fact that existing commitments were being reevaluated reinforced how comprehensive the changes really were. What kinds of criteria are being used for the reconsideration? Beatrice asked. Primarily alignment with strategic priorities and demonstration of clear public benefit, her secretary replied, echoing the language Princess and had used during their lunch. Activities that can show measurable impact or that support government initiatives seem to be receiving priority. This information helped Beatrice understand how to position future engagement proposals, though she couldn't help feeling frustrated that activities she had committed to in good faith were now being subjected to retroactive evaluation. The rest of the week passed in a blur of strategic planning and careful communication with various staff members and advisors. Beatrice found herself approaching royal business with a new level of analytical thinking, considering not just what she wanted to do, but how effectively she could demonstrate the value of those activities within the new framework. Friday brought another significant development when she received a formal invitation to meet with senior staff members to discuss her future role and priorities. The invitation was professionally worded, but clearly represented the kind of direct conversation that Zara had been encouraging her to seek. As Beatrice prepared for what felt like a crucial meeting, she reflected on how much her understanding of the situation had evolved over the past few weeks. What had initially felt like mysterious changes happening around her now appeared to be part of a systematic modernization effort that, while challenging, was being implemented with genuine concern for the institution's future effectiveness. The weekend at Royal Lodge provided an opportunity to discuss these developments with her father and stepmother, both of whom listened with the kind of supportive attention that helped Beatrice clarify her own thinking about how to approach the upcoming meeting. The important thing is to go into that meeting with a clear sense of what you want to accomplish, Prince Andrew advised. Don't just react to what they propose, but have your own ideas ready to present. Sarah's perspective was equally valuable, drawing on her own experience of rebuilding her relationship with the royal family after difficult periods. Remember that everyone wants this to work out well, she said. If you can find ways to align your goals with theirs, you'll be much more likely to achieve a positive outcome. Sunday evening found Beatrice feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks. While the changes in royal operations represented a significant adjustment, they also offered opportunities to define her role more strategically and potentially more effectively than the traditional approach had allowed. The key, she realized, would be to approach the upcoming meeting not as a defensive negotiation, but as a collaborative planning session focused on how she could best contribute to the royal family's mission within the new framework. It was a subtle but important shift in perspective that would shape everything that followed. The morning of her meeting with senior royal staff members dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sunshine that made London look particularly inviting. Princess Beatrice had spent considerable time preparing for this conversation, organizing her thoughts into a presentation that demonstrated both her understanding of the new framework and her vision for how she could contribute effectively within it. The meeting was scheduled to take place at Buckingham Palace, in one of the smaller conference rooms typically used for administrative discussions rather than formal ceremonies. As Beatrice was escorted through the familiar corridors, she felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation about finally having the direct conversation she had been seeking for weeks. The attendees included her own private secretary, representatives from the master of the household's office, and senior staff members who coordinated royal engagements across the family. Their presence confirmed that this was indeed a formal discussion about her role, rather than simply an informational briefing. "Thank you for making time to meet with us," said Sir Michael Hartwell, who served as Deputy Private Secretary to the Sovereign. "We wanted to discuss how the recent modernization of royal duties might affect your activities and explore opportunities for enhanced collaboration going forward." Beatrice appreciated the constructive framing of the discussion, though she remained alert to the careful language being used. The phrase, "enhanced collaboration," suggested that changes to her role were indeed being implemented, but were being presented as opportunities rather than restrictions. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss this directly," Beatrice replied. "I've been following the development of new guidelines with great interest, and I'm eager to understand how I can contribute most effectively within the updated framework." Sir Michael nodded approvingly at her response. "That's exactly the kind of collaborative approach that will make this transition successful for everyone involved. Perhaps you could begin by sharing your understanding of the key principles guiding the modernization effort." Beatrice had anticipated this question and had prepared a response that demonstrated both her grasp of the institutional priorities and her willingness to adapt accordingly. "My understanding is that the focus is on ensuring royal activities demonstrate clear public benefit, align with strategic national priorities, and make effective use of available resources. The goal is to enhance the royal family's ability to serve the public while maintaining the highest standards of accountability." The slight smiles around the table suggested that her summary had captured the key points accurately. Sir Michael made a note before responding. "That's an excellent summary of the core principles. Now, how do you see your current activities and interests fitting within this framework?" This was the question Beatrice had spent the most time preparing for, and she launched into a carefully structured presentation of how her existing commitments and future plans aligned with the new priorities. She focused on her work in education, particularly initiatives that supported digital literacy and entrepreneurship among young people, areas where she could demonstrate both personal expertise and measurable impact. "I believe my background in business and technology, combined with my commitment to educational causes, creates opportunities to support government priorities around innovation and skills development," she explained. "I've been developing proposals for initiatives that would leverage partnerships with established organizations while creating new pathways for young people to develop entrepreneurial capabilities." The response from the staff members was encouraging, with several questions that suggested genuine interest in her proposals rather than polite attention. Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison, who coordinated educational initiatives across royal portfolios, seemed particularly engaged with Beatrice's ideas about digital literacy programs. "These proposals align very well with current government priorities," Mrs. Morrison noted. "Have you had preliminary discussions with any potential partner organizations about implementing these initiatives?" Beatrice had indeed begun such conversations, anticipating that demonstrating practical feasibility would strengthen her position in this meeting. She outlined several partnerships she had been exploring, including collaborations with established educational charities and technology companies that were already implementing similar programs. The discussion continued for over an hour, covering various aspects of how Beatrice's role might evolve within the new framework. While some of her existing commitments would need to be modified or discontinued, there appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for her more strategic proposals. "One area where we see particular potential," Sir Michael said as the meeting began to wind down, "is in your ability to bridge traditional royal service with contemporary priorities around innovation and entrepreneurship. Your background positions you uniquely to speak credibly to audiences that might not naturally engage with more conventional royal activities." This observation struck Beatrice as both an opportunity and a subtle indication of how her role was being positioned within the broader family structure. She would be encouraged to focus on areas where her particular background and interests created distinct value, rather than duplicating activities that other family members were already handling effectively. As the formal portion of the meeting concluded, Sir Michael offered some additional guidance that proved particularly valuable. The implementation of these new guidelines is still evolving, he explained. Family members who can demonstrate initiative and strategic thinking in adapting their roles will have more influence over how their particular portfolios develop. The message was clear. Proactive engagement with the modernization process would be rewarded, while passive resistance or nostalgia for traditional approaches would likely result in diminished roles. Beatrice appreciated the direct communication, even as she recognized the implicit pressure it contained. Leaving Buckingham Palace that afternoon, Beatrice felt a complex mixture of emotions about what she had learned. On one hand, the meeting had provided the clarity she had been seeking and had revealed genuine opportunities for meaningful work within a new framework. On the other hand, it had confirmed that her role would indeed be significantly different from what she had originally envisioned. The drive back to her apartment gave her time to process the implications of the morning's discussions. While she had successfully positioned herself for continued involvement in royal duties, the parameters of that involvement would be more narrowly defined and more carefully monitored than in the past. That evening brought a call from Eugenie, who was eager to hear about the meeting. As Beatrice described the day's events, she found herself focusing on the positive aspects rather than dwelling on the limitations that had also become apparent. "It sounds like they were really receptive to your ideas," Eugenie observed. "And honestly, having a more focused portfolio might end up being more satisfying than trying to cover too many different areas." Her sister's perspective helped Beatrice recognize that the changes, while challenging, might indeed offer advantages she hadn't initially considered. A more strategic approach to royal duties could potentially create greater impact than the broader, but less focused activities she had been pursuing previously. The following week brought rapid developments as Beatrice began implementing the agreements reached during her meeting with royal staff. Several new initiatives moved forward with surprising speed, while some existing commitments were gracefully concluded or transferred to other family members or organizations. The efficiency of the implementation process demonstrated how thoroughly the new framework had been developed before individual discussions like hers had taken place. While this meant less opportunity for input on the overall approach, it also suggested that the changes had been carefully considered and were likely to be sustainable. A particularly significant development came when Zara Tindall reached out to suggest a joint initiative that would combine their respective areas of expertise. The proposal involved developing educational programs that incorporated both Beatrice's technology focus and Zara's experience in sports and youth development. "I think this could be exactly the kind of collaborative approach they're looking for," Zara explained during the planning conversation. "It demonstrates how family members can work together more strategically while each contributing their unique strengths." The joint initiative quickly gained support from royal staff and partner organizations, becoming a model for how the new framework could enhance rather than restrict royal activities. For Beatrice, it represented confirmation that adaptation to the changed circumstances could indeed create new opportunities for meaningful work. As the months that followed demonstrated, the modernization of royal duties had profound implications that extended far beyond individual role adjustments. Media coverage began reflecting a more strategic and coordinated approach to royal activities, while public engagement metrics showed improved effectiveness in several key areas. Beatrice's own experience became a case study in successful adaptation to institutional change. Her willingness to engage constructively with new requirements, combined with her strategic approach to defining her role, resulted in a portfolio of activities that was both more focused and more impactful than her previous work had been. The process had not been without its challenges, and Beatrice occasionally found herself missing the flexibility and spontaneity that had characterized royal duties in earlier eras. However, she had come to appreciate the clarity and accountability that the new framework provided, even as she recognized that future changes would likely require additional adaptations. Perhaps most importantly, The experience had taught her valuable lessons about navigating institutional change while maintaining personal integrity and professional effectiveness. The skills she developed during this period of uncertainty and adjustment would serve her well in future challenges, both within her royal role and in her broader professional activities. Looking back on the months of uncertainty that had preceded her meeting with royal staff, Beatrice recognized that her initial concerns about being excluded from important decisions had been only partially accurate. While the modernization process had indeed been developed with limited input from affected family members, the implementation had been designed to accommodate individual circumstances and preferences to a greater extent than she had initially feared. The key had been her willingness to engage constructively with changes she could not control while asserting appropriate influence over aspects of her role that remained within her discretion. It was a delicate balance that required both humility and confidence, qualities that her royal upbringing had prepared her to exercise when necessary. The broader implications of the modernization effort continued to unfold over time, affecting not only individual family members, but also the public perception of the royal family's relevance and effectiveness. Beatrice's successful adaptation to the new framework positioned her as an example of how traditional institutions could evolve without losing their essential character or mission. As she reflected on the journey from uncertainty to clarity that had characterized this period of her life, Beatrice felt profound gratitude for the support she had received from family members, staff, and advisors who had helped her navigate the complex challenges involved. The experience had ultimately strengthened both her commitment to public service and her confidence in her ability to contribute meaningfully within an evolving institutional context. The future would undoubtedly bring additional changes and challenges, but Beatrice now felt better equipped to approach them with the strategic thinking and collaborative spirit that had served her so well during this crucial period of adaptation and growth.